İyi akşamlar, hoş geldiniz. I'm just going to switch to English. Thank you for tolerating this beautiful photograph on the screen. I'm super pleased today to introduce our colleague, Anne Szefer Karlsen. Anne is in her own words as well, is a curator, collaborator, editor, writer, contributor, and she's truly all these things. And she's the curator of Sculpture Biennale, which will take later this year, Sculpture Biennial in Oslo. And then she was the curator for Lofoten International Art Festival, the LIAF, with Passamel Baroni and Eva Gonzalez Sancho in 2013. And she acted as the associate curator for research and encounters for the Biennale Benin in 2012. And also was also the director for 6 years between 2008 and 2014, the director of Hordaland Art Center in Bergen, Norway, where she also edited and co-edited a series of quite important publications, such as Self-Organized with Stina Herbert, and for the Open Editions. And she was also a series editor, I don't know if you are still, of Doblet, an anthology and artist book project published by the Hordaland Art Center. And in 2006, she co-founded Control plus Z, publishing together with Anne Szefer Karlsen, where she still acts as an editor. Thank you, Anne. And today's talk is In the Shadow of Oil.
Can you hear me now? Yes. Thank you. Cool. Thanks so much for the invitation. And thanks for coming on this rainy evening. I should tell you that I live in the rainiest place in Europe. We have 248 days of rain a year, so I'm kind of used to this. So today we'll have a bit of an experiment, and I hope I won't go over 35 minutes, or I'll try anyway, because it's the first time I present this this paper. I guess it was commissioned as an article for a magazine called Kunstjournalen B-post, and it was published in December. And because it's the first time that I'm presenting it, I'm going to stay quite strictly to the script, but I'll try not to make it like a boring reading, hopefully. It's based on the article, and I have to excuse certain of the details that might seem a bit odd, but it's difficult to know what is needed when you speak contra what is needed when you write, so you'll have to bear with me. What I set out to do was to show the connections and results of the interaction of art and oil in Norway in a new way, I hope, because usually the impact of the oil economy on the arts is generally discussed in my own context from a moral perspective, basically being the binary, should artists say yes to funding from the oil business or shouldn't they? Because the industry, of course, as we all know, seems to be pretty unsustainable. So that's usually the context that is discussed in Norway. There is, of course, an additional problematic to this, which is that the Norwegian government actually owns the oil shelf and the whole industry is nationalized, but I'll get to that. So that's kind of the introduction. And for those, I have actually met people that don't know what an oil platform is, so I'm going to point at it, just because I have a pointer. So this thing is an oil platform, and they're outside and, offshore, they're far off in the sea, and they drill oil like crazy, and they're very profitable. So the offshore oil platforms in the North Sea, in the case of Norway, can be seen as an historical and economic condition that's been decisive in shaping the art field of Norway as it is today. Not only have the tax revenues from the oil sector poured money into the public coffers, which has in turn been distributed to artists and art institutions via various funding schemes, but the oil sector has also invested directly in the arts, so there is a twofold investment there. So in this article that I based this talk on, I wanted to look more closely at what happens to the art field when it's embedded within the oil economy. And to help me, I turned to an archive that I've been staring at for 6 years at the Hordaland Art Center. It's been like in boxes in my office, literally. Every day I've been looking at these boxes, wanted to really handle their contents. But finally I had time last year to look at these archives. And they concern 3 public art projects in particular for the oil platforms that were called Gullfaks A, B, and C. And you'll hear these names again. So, and I'll also explain more about the name. But there are three platforms, A, B, and C. So even though the starting points are quite similar to an academic study, I would say you have the archive and then you have a national methodology and it's all very proper. I assure you that this is not an academic paper because I had a goal with my research, and it was to try to reveal links to other petrostates and their attitudes towards contemporary art. And by doing that, I also wanted to position Norway in a new geography. I also wanted to investigate the term protectionism, that I felt and still feel is very present in the Norwegian art context, especially on the financial level, which you'll see also that I'm obsessing a bit about economy here today. But that's basically what the oil is rent from the ground. So the Gullfaks A, B, and C platforms were quite groundbreaking. They were combined drilling and production platforms, and they were built and towed out to sea during the 1980s. And they're situated in what's called Block 3410, which is a technical term. I'll show you a map. So this here is the North Sea. This is the Norwegian part of it. And it's all divided up in little cells, so they're called blocks. And this block where the Gullfaks platforms were positioned was commonly known as Gullblokka, which means the golden block, before its official name of Gullfaks, which comes from Northern mythology. So it was also the first time that a block on the Norwegian continental shelf had been granted exclusively to Norwegian companies, and there's Statoil, that many of you might know, Norwegian Hydro, and Saga Petroleum. Before that, most of the operating companies were American. And for the county of Hordaland, which is a region in Norway, Gullfaks was of a major significance because, and particularly for the art field, because it meant an infusion of several million kroner in just a few years. And maybe I'll be a bit of a geography teacher here. So Gullfaks is here. This is Troll. It's a field that was opened a lot later that I'll come back to. Bergen is here, and the region of Hordaland is kind of this part of Norway. Down here you have Stavanger, which is commonly known as the oil capital. So they're quite close, and Stavanger won the race of becoming the oil... Anyway, Stavanger won the competition of becoming the oil capital. It was a huge feud that I won't go into. So, which also meant that this Gullfaks positioning outside of the coast of Bergen was very important once it was decided. Don't worry. Getting back to the economy, there was a total of 3.5 million Norwegian kroner spent on the art for all of these 3 platforms. And some of it was spent on purchasing existing works, and some of it was spent on commissions. And today that would amount to something like 7.2 million Norwegian kroner, which is just below a million euro. And work on these public art projects spanned roughly about 5 years. And for all 3 platforms, the art was procured by Hordaland Art Center, which had been directly invited by the oil company of Statoil to manage this process. And the Art Center appointed 2 artists, Lilian Dale and Bengt Moberg, as consultants for the Gullfaks A platform. And the procedures they adopted set a precedent also for the Gullfaks B and C project, respectively, where the consultants Marianne Myhrer and Gunnar Thorsen was appointed for the B platform, and Therese Christensen og Gjerstad were appointed for the C platform. This seems very technical, but it's important when we come back to who actually has the power to decide what art ends up on the platforms. And this is the technical drawings of the living quarters for the B platform. And although the architecture and function of the platforms imposed significant constraints, as they say in the plans of the art, on the space in which to maneuver as an artist, the choices that the committees made still exhibit certain attitudes that were typical of the day. And as Terry Smith says in an article from '74 from Art Forum, there is no ideologically neutral cultural acts, and I quite like this quote, which is why I still keep it in. And this is also an attitude that is clearly evident in the cases of these platforms. This is a close-up. It doesn't seem very comfortable, but I guess they were happy. According to material in the archive, the art committee for Gullfaks A consisted also of a representative from the Statoil company. His name was Bjørn Egeland, in addition to the two consultants. And it had been decided that each cabin should have original artworks. That means, in the case of the A platform, that they had 290 pieces of works to buy, which is it's a pretty high number. And it looked like this. So I've kind of been able to see this from invoices and receipts from the project, that the consultants made their purchases only in Bergen and Oslo, either directly from an artist, via galleries, which there aren't that many of, artists run exhibition spaces that there are more of in Norway, and other institutions. And I'd like to just show you, just for curiosity. So this is another one with the funny detail of the phone being for some reason off. But these are the lists of works for the A platform. So you can see it's quite a substantial buying power that they had. Also considering prices were quite low for art. They were lots of graphic prints and things in there. However, all the commissions, which consumed actually most part of the budget, were awarded to artists from the region of Hordaland. And the same approach was used in the Gullfaks B and C projects as well. And in retrospect, we would expect there to have been more of a discussion of whether it was appropriate for the art committees of the B and C platforms to apply the same approach as had been for the A platform, with commissions granted to regional artists, while original works for the cabins were purchased in the two biggest cities, Bergen and Oslo. And according to the art plan, which basically is a description of the art project that the committee makes before they start working on these public art projects, we're basically creating a framework for the way that they're going to work with these projects. The A platform contained, and there's a few quotes here, endless rooms and long corridors. Because of the architecture and the materials used in the structure, it was not easy to know where one was in the building. Hang on. Oh, here's another one. This is from the control room. So these are commissioned textile works. And that's a guy doing something. Oh, that's right. Oh yeah, there you go. There's another piece which is hanging in the stairs. This textile piece was commissioned. Here you go. Yeah, so I was talking about how they described the platform. Not easy to know where one was in the building, south or north, on the 4th floor or on the 6th floor, they wrote in the art plan. And I brought these floor plans because this is, what is this? So this is north 1. So I guess it's the first floor, north facing. Here's north 2. And then you go 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, hang on, this is fun. Here's a pool table. And the television. And 7. And this is the more technical floors, I guess. This is more production, as well as this. Here you see the helipad where they fly in for their shifts. And they, of course, they live on the platform, so they fly in and out every week. And there's another plan on, here's a plan on upper mezzanine deck. And there's another one. Yeah, you need this here. So the committee, this is all from the A plan. The committee wanted to use art to enrich, quote, an otherwise under-stimulating environment, and would do this, to this end buy and commission so-called engaging, poetic, provocative, and beautiful art. In addition to its intrinsic artistic value, the art should give the platform an identity, while also making the environment more pleasant and providing a sense of security. So the art had many tasks. This is all the results on the C platform, but the 3 plans look almost identical. There was no collector's impulse creating a valuable collection in these cases. Neither was the oil company striving to build its image or reputation. On the contrary, one of the guiding principles behind the purchases and commissions was that the art should be, quote, accessible, unquote. The works that were purchased and created for these platforms both had and I would say still have little market value. From the list of works that I've seen, I'm sure that there are a few works that would be considered valuable today, but absolutely 99% of it probably wouldn't. Most of it would probably be also damaged from being out there. The art was intended to domesticate a harsh environment, both architecturally and perhaps also culturally. We should remember that the oil business was known at the time for being a bit of a Wild West situation. There was also lots of accidents and deaths, and there was very little focus on security and health and things for the workers that built the platform. So it was really a booming industry that on documentaries seem like the gold rush. It's really weird. But because of this so-called harsh environment, the emphasis was on works with high accessibility value. And contradictory to the term, for sure, since those works would be located far out at sea and only be seen by employees and the few people who visited the platforms, which aren't that many at all. And here you see another very strange documentation shot. But these are works by a fairly famous painter called Eilif Amundsen, and they don't make much of themselves here, but he's a truly wonderful artist who died a few years ago. Today we would say that the Gullfaks art served merely as decor, as we also can see here. They're kind of juxtaposed with tulips in the sofas. So. Yet the art also played a part in what we have termed nationally as the Norwegian oil adventure, and this is basically the kind of more fun name of the oil industry. But this point is rarely made the role of art is rarely mentioned in the discussion of the oil industry at all. And not only were the Gullfaks art projects political as such, they also eloquently indicated the kind of political impact the oil economy would have on the field of art. And I guess this is where my focus is in this. And the boom years that preceded Gullfaks, which, as I mentioned, happened in the middle of the 80s, this boom turned out in 1986 to be quite unreliable, and revenue from the Norwegian export dwindled because of international market fluctuations. And being a new business to Norway, little was known about these fluctuations at the time, and it was seen as a huge crisis, because in the mid-1980s the oil prices slumped drastically and extremely rapidly because of attitudes in the OPEC countries that are mainly Middle Eastern. Because they opted to defend their market shares instead of keeping the prices high. So the global prices just went straight down. And we can see something similar happening today for different geopolitical reasons, but I'm sure linked, but that's kind of another story. And the archive material about the A project, one reads that the plan for a printed brochure about the art on the platforms eventually were shelved, and it actually says here that I have them with me, which I do, I think. Yeah, there you go. So let's see. I have two of them. So this is the B and the C platforms, and you can just take them and send them around. And this is kind of the only sign I saw of the oil crisis in '86, is that this brochure that was planned for the A platform didn't happen. And I found it in a letter dated in July '86. The consultants informed all the artists, quote, "Prospects do not look good for the information brochure we had envisaged in connection with this art project." And they added, "This is due in part to low oil prices and the reductions in Statoil's budgets, etc." And when I read that, because in '86 I was 10, so I kind of didn't register on my radar that there was an oil crisis in '86. I questioned this. I was like, what? There can't be an oil crisis. What do you mean smaller budgets? It's the oil business. That's impossible. And I had to kind of look through things, and it was a pretty serious thing, and the government had to leave because they projected different packages to increase prices on oil, whatnot. So we lost the government basically on this crisis, which I had no recollection of. But just as on shore, just to return to the art, the public art on the platforms did not bring about any kind of transformation other than the purely aesthetic. And neither was the art transformed by being placed on the oil platforms. Thus, these works remained fairly uneventful, as we can see they're pretty silent there in the back. And even so, the archive materials does contain some occasional hints of excitement, and this is when you're going through an archive, you think you strike gold, right? There is an artist called Bård Breivik. He was invited to propose a sculptural work for the art committee in connection to the A platform, and I think the letter is like 5 pages handwritten. It's really, really long, and he says, hang on, there's a bit of a quote there. So his take on the invitation to propose something for the A platform was, oil platforms are among the most interesting architecture of the present. These immense structures constitute a winning of territory and pose many of the same challenges as did the cathedrals of medieval times. They are among the largest structures we can build given the existing physical constraints. They represent hard-won experience and have even cost lives. They are, in a sense, the pyramids of our age, which is, pretty spectacular. This is not from his proposal. This is from Snorre Killingmark's proposal. I just wanted to show, because this is basically how commissions were handed, like proposals for commissions were handed in. Like, okay, so this is the platform. This is from, I can't read it now, but I can kind of remember. This is a wall that goes through the stair shaft of probably this, where the living quarters are. So this is supposed to be a huge something on the wall. I can't remember the material, but this is basically how these commission sketches were sent in. And to kind of move on towards the commission, so this is one of the hints that I found to kind of support my hypothesis, I would guess you could call it, because a number of artists featured disproportionately in the Gullfaks project. Unfortunately, the archive, as I said, only contains pictures of the commissioned works, and there are few images of the works purchased for the cabins. Actually, the 2 I showed you are the only ones that I have. However, the lists of these latter make it clear that they consisted primarily of prints of various kinds. There were also a few paintings, smaller numbers of watercolors, collages, photographs, textile prints, a few wall hangings, drawings and ceramic items, such as plates and mugs, would be placed in the cabins. But the commissions would be of a more spectacular size, like the wooden beams that you see holding up the stairs, with these 2 works in connection to them. So, in terms of the disproportionate representation, this is Svein Rønning. He contributed with 6 works, presumably print, to the A platform. He had another 6 prints bought for the C platform, and the art committee of the B platform commissioned him to design a work for the reception area of the platform, which is this work. And then there is another, he works and lives in Bergen, he's a well-played artist. Then there is someone like Sissel Brystad, from whom 2 paintings were bought for the B platform, 2 pastels for the C platform, and she too received the direct commission for 7 tapestries for the B platform, which were hung on the landings of the 7th-story stairwell, so I guess close to the effect that the other artists that I showed wanted. The information brochure about the C platform also informs us that another of Brystad's characteristic wall hangings, which we see examples of here, were purchased for one of the platform's communal areas, so she's also highly represented. I'm not going to go into detail about who else were overrepresented in this equation, but I also wanted to mention, and this is the reason why I mentioned the names of the consultants in the beginning, because consultants such as Therese Christensen, Lilian Dahl and Bengt Moberg were involved in the project for all 3 platforms in the role of consultants, as I mentioned, and as artists who contributed with purchased works or commissions, and some of them were awarded directly, some of the commissions were awarded directly, and others were following competitions. So I'll get back to this maybe at a later stage. So here you see, this is from the A platform being towed out to sea. This is basically how it goes. You have a platform, they have lots of tanks underneath that are not filled yet, so it's kind of high in the sea, and you have these boats that just pull them out. And the caption here says, Gullfaks A is the lump of gold which has led to record high activity at Stord the last 2 years, which is a place outside of Bergen. And yesterday the tow started, bringing this gigantic platform to the North Sea. And in an August 1984 article, we presented the prospective plans for the B and C platforms. Quote, the Gullfaks C platform could be operational by 1991, although this schedule is so tight that it is merely likely to start production in 1992, end quote. But according to Statoil's prospectus about the Gullfaks field, which was issued before the project was put into effect, it says, quote, the Gullfaks C platform could start production in phase 2 at the earliest in the first half of the 90s. If a later starting point is chosen for the phase 2 development, then Gullfaks C will come on stream towards the end of the 1990s. However, in the archives of the Art Center, we find that Gullfaks C art project had been set in motion already in 1988. Quote, it was towed out to the oil field in the spring of '89, so actually 10 years before their worst predictions. And this is all in the C brochure, which is floating around. So the investment in the oil sector was immense and has been until today. And in the 1980s, time was short and one could no longer wait to bring up the oil. So there was a stressful situation for most of them in that business. And this haste is also evident in the handling of the art project. So on August 29th, 1986, the director of the Art Center, Karin Patricia Kleppe, wrote to Statoil's representative Bjørn Egeland about the Gullfaks B project, with copies to the consultants, and this is how I found it. Quote, one consequence of the tight time schedule is that we cannot justify the procedure of inviting artists to compete for public commissions, end quote. The art committees and the artists they selected without competition were working against the clock to compete for commissions for this platform. And now I'll just briefly say this is the B platform being dragged out to sea, and it says traditional and modern resource use. In the background, the Gullfaks B platform is towed out of the fjord in Rogaland, which is the county south of Hordaland. I'll leave this black for a little bit because we're moving into more of a not so visually representative part of the research. Because parallel with the growth and reforms that were reshaping the oil industry during the 70s and 80s, the public sector was also overhauled. And among other things, the Norwegian government set up a dedicated oil ministry, which is, I guess, natural. And the state assumed ownership of the oil fields on the continental shelf and completely nationalized the sector. In 1976, the county councils were established as independent administrative bodies with various responsibilities devolved from the central government. So there was a third layer of administration being created between the city or municipality and the national government. So there's a mid-level, which is also where Hordaland comes into the equation, because this is one of the regions that gained its own administration. In the field of art, so this is the general administration of the country. In the field of art, the National Foundation for Art in Public Buildings, which today is called KORO, was also set up in '76. Sorry. That was inconvenient. So in '76 you had the county councils being established, you had the public art funds set up, and also the various art centres within their county affiliations were set up, such as the Hordaland Art Centre. And also, shortly after, something called the RSU, which is a regional public art jury that appoints art consultants and approves public art plans within the different committees. Sorry, I really have to go. So, with these parallel developments, it's evident that infrastructure expansions also resulted in increased institutionalization and bureaucratization within the arts field. And it was a policy that was pushed not only by administrations and politicians, but also by artists, and this is an important point. And it was all fueled by favorable oil economy, of course. And so the closed competitions for commissions and the guidelines for the appointment of consultants were established at this time. And this is kind of an administrative development within the arts circuit, because these conventions still actually hold quite strongly today. They're not very much different today than they were in the late 70s. So also, although the Gullfaks projects were in fact independent of governmental structures, protocols and requirements, the Arts Center and later the consultants, together with the Statoil representative, chose to follow the same conventions that had been established through the collaboration between artists and public authorities, as mediated through the previously mentioned RSU committee. There's lots of committees in Norwegian art world. I'm not even going to excuse it or try to explain it, but it's committee on committee. In other words, it's evident that people in the art field were very eager to use the structures that had been put in place over the past decade, which also helped to standardize the commissioning process for art in public spaces. And it's worth emphasizing that the field of art for public space forms a distinct subsection of the Norwegian art world, as you saw when you visited Bergen. It's lots of money and huge commissions are being filtered through this system. But what's particular is that the specialists who assume the responsibility, which is the artist consultants, they're independent of any institution. So consequently, it's non-affiliated individuals who get to define the projects, making it difficult for institutional agendas to influence the projects. And this is true not of the Gullfaks projects that I'm talking about today, but actually most public art projects in the past 30, 40 years, which is why, to me, it's quite... I question the fact that all the projects were sold in such similar ways, and this is kind of the knowledge of how the system works is the lead into questioning these public art projects and the platforms. And the archive material from the Gullfaks project consists of documents and photos, but with the exception of notes from one discussion, no minutes from meetings have been preserved at the Art Center. So there are no written notes from any of the meetings that took place within this project. However, there are minutes from the RSU committee, on the other hand, and they indicate that questions were raised about the impartiality of those involved with the Gullfaks B project in particular. So when the B platform came, they started questioning people's abilities, I guess one could call it. And after several rounds of discussion, it was decided in 1986 by this committee that the number of professional artists in the county was so small that it would be difficult to find sufficient competent people for the various juries and committees generated by the formal restructuring of recent years if the artists who sat on these bodies were prohibited from accepting commissions. So basically they said that this population is too small to handle the administration and the bureaucracy, we just have to get the best artists to do all the work, meaning being both on the juries and being the commissioned artists. So that's the reason for all this over-representation in certain instances. So although most artists, most probably, were well aware of global trends and inspired by the art of other geographies, which also some of the accounts of these catalogues that is going around kind of tell us, they did not open up their circles to the outsider or to other forms of expression other than their own. So in other words, the archive material suggests a protectionist attitude, and it's worthwhile asking why these projects give us that impression today. And protectionism might be, I don't know, it might seem like a very harsh term for some people, but the material reveals internal loyalties and an unspoken sense of shared identity that is difficult to describe in any other way. And the Gullfaks project tended to fuel a regionalistic mindset that favored the local and the national, as I've kind of proven with statistics before in this talk. And when we turn our attention to regionalism as a term, protectionism has a conspicuous part to play here. However, the question is what region we're speaking of. For protectionism, in its various forms, remain a prominent feature of oil-producing countries. Haha. So here's, it's kind of, the plot is thickening a little bit. Because until the 1990s, the term protectionism, the accepted wisdom, I guess one could say in social sciences, was that poverty was creating the most favorable conditions for regionalism. In opposition to a wealthier, more powerful center, provided the foundation of a common identity. So the underdog would form a community to stand up against the power. However, today, the evidence seems to suggest that regionalism tends to thrive where there is wealth. So it's a re-evaluation of the term happening within social sciences, which is kind of basically flipping it on its head. Because wealth allows one to seek political power from a strong financial position, which in turn stimulates interests, and it also stimulates investments in cultural statements, favoring the production of a visual language that supports a shared identity. So rather than being the poor ones coming together to form, in this case, a visual opposition to the richer center, it's the rich ones that does that. Even so, the regionalism has rarely been explicitly discussed in the field of art, not even in times like these when we're kind of re-evaluating or critically re-evaluating globalization. And economics are therefore the major importance to the concept of regionalism rather than the art. So I draw on economy in this paper. And as such, economics should perhaps be more prominent in our discussion of art, and not only as it is today through a discussion of the art market, or commercial galleries, or oligarchs, whatnot, but economy in a, let's say, a purer form. The rise of oil nations has occurred parallel to this globalization, which has been high speed, and it's also a result of, and let's say it's a result of oil, and the consequence of oil. And it's also sorted out the homogenization of culture. So oil is kind of the root to everything, is my understanding of it here anyway. And in the art field, this homogenization has been evident both in expressions and modes of expressions that we've seen, maybe particularly through the so-called biennial cultures. So although the globalization has influenced the art world, it does not seem to have had much effect on art institutions in countries where the oil industry is strong. That's kind of that one follows the other here. For oil-producing countries and their institutions can act with relative independence from external economic forces, allowing them to avoid the trend towards cultural homogenization and to define their own methods and goals. In other words, they're more resistant to globalization processes. And I mean, with this very particular situation of all these juries and committees and all the public art and all these things. In Norway, that's kind of the field that in one way proves the point. So ironically, oil is the one commodity that does not follow the logic imposed by globalization, which has taught us that markets aren't restrained by national borders. And Imre Seemann writes in an article called Oil Futures that I've really enjoyed reading. He says it's political, it's as in oil, its political value as a globally traded commodity is such that it apparently cannot be permitted to slosh autonomously through the markets. So oil is actually the one exception to the global market rule. And then we were moving back to the 1980s, when the Western European art scene opened up to the world in a new way. We could, for instance, see the much debated exhibition Magiciens de la Terre at Centre Pompidou in 1989 in Paris, which promoted, and I quote, the idea of universal creative impulse. And this was also the decade when the oil economy carved out an alternative path for artists in Norway, leading to structural changes that are only apparent today. In Norway in the 70s and 80s, artists were focused on negotiating collective, exclusively Norwegian funding schemes that were only conceivable because of the thriving economy, while their colleagues in most other countries were struggling with tropes of globalization, such as market liberalization, the compression of time and space, the importance of the network societies, etc. Norwegian artists, by contrast, were and still are, to a large extent, less dependent on integrating with broader international contexts and markets, which means that financially and in terms of reputation, they're less susceptible to the vagaries of the globalized art field than are artists in other countries. At the same time, we have to assume that on the individual level, this was also a time when arts in Norway became more internationally oriented. So this is not to say that all Norwegian artists stuck, within the borders and gained lots of financial gain from the state and didn't kind of think in a global way. But structurally, I would say this is true. So if we consider the general developments in Norway during the period when the field of art in public spaces developed, together with the changes in the public sector, we see that the oil economy has distanced us somewhat from our neighbours, making us more like other oil-producing nations. And it's easy to identify these similarities in societies more broadly, as journalist and writer Anne Szefer points out in a really interesting book from 2009 called Petromania, a journey through the world's richest oil countries to discover what money does to us. And it's a really beautiful book. But in his introduction, he humorously describes the condition that we find ourselves in as follows, and here comes another quote. Something must have happened to our country, something that can only be observed from the outside, from where it looks like a party has just, from where it looks like a party that just goes on and on without one knowing what time it is or who the host is. But in your inebriated state, you can just about hear the neighbor knocking. The elephant in the room are a blind spot, end quote. So he's basically saying that we're all on a huge rave or something, which I couldn't actually say is not true. But the accounts that he gives in the book are from his trips to Kuwait, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Turkmenistan, Venezuela, Gabon, and Angola in the space of 2007 and 2008. And he casts a light on Norway that produces an image very different from the one that we're accustomed to and that we have created ourselves. Attitudes towards the service sector and the labour market in general have changed, for one, as have our perception of time, and hence also our notion of short and long-term thinking, which is very serious in a political way, because you have no idea what to focus on. Consequently, it can be illuminating to consider the art projects on the Gullfax platforms from an international perspective. And here I imagine Art Norway as belonging to a region of oil-producing nations, those who have gotten rich quickly by harvesting the resources of the Earth's crusts, whether from beneath the sea or the desert, who have invested some of their wealth in cultural products and contemporary art in particular. Our neighbours are no longer Iceland, Sweden and Denmark, but rather the United Arab Emirates, Qatar and the like. So I've been going after a few examples in oil-producing countries that I'll share with you quite briefly, such as the Tehran Museum of Contemporary Art in Iran is an example of how a thriving economy can help to nurture a so-called counterforce to the traditional centers of power within the art world. Because they nationalized their oil reserves in 1950, and after this, Iran began a long reform process. The museum was opened in 1977, with Queen Farah Pahlavi as its principal patron, and together with two American curators, David Galloway and Donna Stone, and her own chief of staff, the Queen oversaw the purchase of works by Western artists such as Dali, Picasso, and Warhol. And in due course, the museum assembled the largest collection of Western art outside of the West at the time. I'm not entirely sure if it's still true, it might be. Another example is from the same year, which is the Second World Black and African Festival of Arts and Culture, with a very long name, with the short name Festak 77, which took place in Lagos, which is the capital of Nigeria, of the oil nation Nigeria, one might say. As a cultural festival, this was a tour de force. Its ideology was to strengthen intercontinental cooperation in Africa and to challenge preconceptions about black culture, negritude, which had taken root in the 20th century, especially in the Francophone West Africa, in order to avert further cultural colonization. This was the aim of Festak. It was an event that helped Nigeria to make its mark as an important cultural nation, which was only possible through the oil wealth. And who is he? Andrew Aptner wrote a book in 2005, which is a wonderful read. It's called The Pan-African Nation, Oil and the Spectacle of Culture in Nigeria. And he says, national culture was produced not just as a symbol of political unity, but as a distinctive form of exchange value that derived from oil and reflected its vitality. Its substance remained mystical, part money and part blood. And one nation that we might think of more easily today, which has gained significance and maybe even notoriety as a global patron in the contemporary art field, is Qatar. Although the kingdom's private collections have been actively built by buying up artifacts and historic and contemporary art from the broader region since the 1980s, today these collections can be viewed by the public in a variety of museums run by the Qatar Museum Authority, which is currently undergoing some overhaul, so it's going to be a so-called private entity for the public good, although it will still be run by the current Emir sister. And according to Art Review, which is a magazine, the QMA spent around $1 billion on the purchase of art in 2013. And in 2010, the Sheikha said, quote, "Our mission is of cultural integration and independence. We don't want to have what there is in the West. We don't want their collections. We want to build our own identities." So in other words, the overarching goal of the QMA is to define a particular art culture, and this is, of course, only possible because of this oil wealth. So if we're going back a little bit, in the mid-90s, the Art Center in Hordaland, we're going back to the slightly smaller scale in Qatar, was again contacted by Statoil. This time it was a request to find art for a fourth platform, which is called Petrol. And according to, I just add this because it's a very crazy fact, but according to the Petrol Global News in 2013, it's the largest object ever moved by mankind relative to the surface of the Earth. And this is a stamp that I grew up with from the 90s. This is the Eiffel Tower, and this is the platform, and this is that, and this is going into the sea. And there are lots of tanks down here that it's going to be filled, and it's going to go down, and it's going to produce lots of oil. And the archive material relating to this project, which is here, they've gone to the another design. It reveals a distinct shift in attitude concerning art for the platforms. And for example, we read in the information brochure, which is over there, about the purchases and commissions, quote, "With the art procured for the Troll facilities, Statoil has expanded its already substantial collection of Norwegian contemporary art." So now it's a collection, and it's a national collection. And compared with the three international examples above with Tehran and Festak and the QMA, the organization of the Gullfaks platform has a kind of a hybrid structure. Whereas the Iranian, Nigerian and Qatari institutions are run by respective government ministries or royal families, in Norway it is a state-owned company that invested in contemporary art. Nevertheless, it's important to point out that the sums invested by Statoil are comparable to those spent by the state on public buildings during the same period, and that Statoil has applied the guidelines jointly worked out by the state bodies and artists that I mentioned before, that they together decided to use these structures. And during the 80s, substantial sums were invested in a relatively small art scene, using new democratic mechanisms for the handling of art projects that had been worked out between the country's artists and public authorities. And although there was no obligation to use this approach, the more or less conscious protectionist attitude that was thereby encouraged has left us with various challenges. So this collaboration between the state and the artists in light of all this money has given us some, one could say, problems. So although in the 90s and 2000s artists began to show greater interest in gaining a so-called international experience, it's now evident that the optimism that once characterized the Art Norway project, with its official mechanisms to assess artistic quality and its democratically controlled boards and scholarships, in combination with an ever stronger oil economy, has shielded Norwegian artists from globalization and prompted protectionist attitudes that we are now finding it hard to shake off. And this is where I wanted to go with the archive, and I kind of found my way through it. So as I said, it's not an academic paper, but it's an investigation of a feeling that at least I've had for many years working in Norway, that, you know, when I was running the art center, I always had to ask when there was funding, it was like, well, it has to be national. Like that had to be my impulse, because if not, I would probably step, you know, on some landmine somewhere, and they would be, of course it's national, and then, you know, I'd have to, you know, work accordingly. Which no, it's not a problem. There's lots of good artists in art in Norway, but it's just the mindset which is very protectionist. So that's it. I'm just going to see if there was another one. No. Look at this. Fantastic. So I guess if there are any questions or comments, I'd be happy to respond at least. I might not have the answers.
Well, a quick question about artist contracts. I was wondering if in your research at the archive, have you come across any type of contracts, type of documents that were signed between the artist and the company itself?
Oh, yeah.
When they made the first acquisitions? Because I know that might sound like a naive question, but I was just curious to know more about what the artists themselves thought about what would happen to their work in like 20 years later, or or whether they believe that the company would be forever committed to the preservation of the works.
Yeah, no, they're not committed to the preservation. I mean, it doesn't come in the contract. There are folders and folders and folders of contracts. We love contracts. It has to be in a contract. Come on, But it's stipulated the price and the handling of the in terms of commissions at least, the way that the artist is supposed to act and what points they have to deliver, etc., up until they give their work away or sell their work in effect. But kind of there's a handover ceremony actually, where you place the work and they agree that this is what the commission was, and after that there is nothing in the contract saying anything about let's say the safe and well-being of the artwork, unfortunately. But I'm sure that they must have discussed it, because this is going into the sea. The North Sea is a rough sea. This is why I'm thinking that most of the works that have not been framed or vacuum framed or whatever, they're probably deteriorating. However, I should note that most of the work is still out there, because it's economy in the end as well. Like, they wouldn't bring the works back in on shore, because if it's destroyed, I'm sure they will just throw it, because it's not financially viable to take down a huge wall hanging like one of the Blystad tapestries or whatever to bring it back. Like, they would probably chuck it, they would get rid of it, they wouldn't bring it back for mending or anything. It's a very pragmatic business that way, and it's an object, and they don't have that. Maybe today they have more respect for the art, because Statoil is a huge collector today. It's one of Norway's biggest company collectors, and they do have, I have to say, they have a beautiful collection. Much of it is fantastic what they're buying, and they're also buying internationally today. This is also why I mentioned this project contra the ones in the 80s, because they kind of become collectors. In the 80s they were not at all, but the 80s works are still there, because I know some oil workers and they go out and they check for them. So, yeah. But no, not in the contract.
Hello. This might be a slightly pedantic question, but I'm curious if you've had the opportunity, the time, and resources to analyze the demographics that the artist selected for any Guldflux undertaking collection.
What do you mean in terms of representation?
Yeah, like gender, age.
I haven't analyzed it. It's I would assume it's more or less 50-50-ish, because it's kind of the time, the political time of feminism was in the 70s, and there was a very, as you can, the consultants, there's one man, there's one woman, there's one fine artist, and there's one craft artist. And this is it's a very kind of egalitarian society in that way. The age, I haven't analyzed, but I know from rumors, local rumors, that there were some younger artists at the time that were very annoyed by these consultants, because they didn't buy their works or approach them at all. So it was kind of in a very closed segment. And this is kind of a scary thing to say, because I live with these artists, they're kind of like door, but they were very protectionist, in generation and in terms of geography. So that's kind of what I can say of demographics.
Thank you.
Yeah. And there are not that many older artists either. So it really is, I would say they must have been like in the, I don't know, 30s maybe, late 30s, early 30s, around that, when you're not a beginner anymore, but you're not really a senior yet. So. I guess that's could talk about oil forever, but I'm not going to.
Can you speak a little bit more about this? I mean, Norwegian regionalism versus like Iranian, collection of international art and bringing it over versus the Qatari, the more recent Qatari, that like the QMA experience. Because I mean, in general too. I mean, Norway has a way of not showing its wealth, or showing it in a very different way. And that's one. And that regionalism is, you mentioned, Mecrasının and all of that. I mean, towards the end of the 80s, and what I mean, are these really considered as public projects? Because I mean, there's nothing public about it. First of all, I mean, maybe the process, part of the process may be public, and it's invisible to. It's in the name of the public, perhaps, but there's nothing public about it. So, production and drilling platform out there that only workers on the platform sees. It's like like regular company art in a way. And how was the art? I mean, how was the general art situation in the mid '80s in Norway, and how these artists, which seem to have a kind of a coherence, right, of sorts. And was there another art world out there with vis-a-vis this, or was it actually the regionalism a policy, or was it perhaps what was there, or what was not so emergent in the local space? Was curious.
I mean, in no particular order. I'll try to make it into one answer. So, of course, there were, let's say, alternative art scenes to this. There was, of course, I'm not an art historian, I should mention that. And I was quite young in the 80s, and I'm acting on a hunch here. No, but there was, of course, let's say, performative practices that were quite experimental, also in Bergen, and that would probably be the older generation of these guys. So I would say that it's a segment of the art world that is represented, which is materially and object-oriented. There are prints. Print was, of course, a stronghold in the 70s, seeped into the 80s. So that's one way of looking at it. There were multiple art scenes. Thankfully, I mean, there wasn't one. Even though the country is small and there are few artists, it was a diversity. What was the other question? Oh my God, I can't remember the other question.
Regionalism and Norway's policy versus Iran.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's true. No, Iran is interesting. It's the odd one out in these 4 examples. No, it's the only one that tries to buy their cultural capital. I mean, they buy it from abroad instead of investing in their own for a reason that I haven't actually looked into. And in terms of the wealth issue, it's not a showy culture, as you know. So the wealth is shown through structures like this, where there is a democracy, let's say, to the distribution of wealth. If I'm to be very ideologically, I mean, it's not true in the extreme extent to what I say now, but to make it simple, it's a simplification. It's a distribution of wealth which is more important than the bling factor, and they are public projects because, as you say, they are company art, and it's the same as if I go to Telenor, which is the Norwegian phone company, the old government phone company. I would have to go to the reception, ask to be let in to see the company art there, as you would in any other company building. Just so happens that this is it. So it's actually impossible. They do accept visitors though. In the month of June, they fly out visitors that are invited mostly, but it's possible with with a very strong wish to visit one of the platforms, but only in June because the weather is good.
But okay, I mean, the beauty of it is that in the photographs you have this kind of art or craft art or whatever it may be, versus the decoration, which is like so much of its time, and there's something that is just not it's either in perfect harmony or completely at odds.
Yeah.
You have this because it's very timely.
Yeah.
About its time and how the art works with it is quite interesting to see.
But I'm sure. I mean, I think the disharmony, as you say, is very visible, of course, with the words and the images, the way that they're described. But I'm thinking that it must also been quite an unknown territory for the consultants and for the art world. Like here, there are lots of new regulations. They have to we have to be very proper about this, and they're like more bureaucratic than bureaucracy themselves. You know, also because the art scene is so small that they're trying to keep this kind of arm length distance, which is not more than a finger's distance. You know, because of the small size of the art scene, they're both trying to decide and be the artist. It's a very, I think it was a very confusing time for the art scene to establish these routines and to use them. It is sometimes still. So yeah, it's an odd system. It's very it's difficult. I mean, I'm trying to portray to you the kind of the levels of organization, and to me it's kind of backbone reflex. But to most people that I try to discuss this with, they're like, "You what? Like, and then you do, and how, and what do you do?" You know, it's really rigid. You know. So I guess it's also put limits on what kind of art they could put out there. So there is also the architectural limitations that they discuss also in the plans. I don't know if this is what you were asking about. I have a feeling you're actually asking about something.
I was also trying to kind of figure out, I mean, like minus the oil situation, how would regionalism manifest itself? I'm just trying to figure out, like, comparing it, for example, to Finland, for example.
Yeah, no.
You know.
That's what you were asking. I think we would be extremely outgoing and welcoming and being like, I think we would suffer a bit. Like we wouldn't be self-contained for sure, because today there are 5 million. When I grew up, we were 4 million people. So, which is nothing. I mean, I'm sitting here. How big is the city? It's like 3 times that. The city is 3 times that. The country where I come from is that, and it's a huge territory, and it's a really like the population is dispersed because of political reasons. The whole country is supposed to be populated, which means that the neighbor isn't right next door. The neighbor might be 3 kilometers down the road in certain instances. Like I know people that I studied with at the university level that would gladly go 3 hours in the car for a party when they were teenagers, and that would be going to the neighbor, you know. And that's kind of the scale that we're talking about. So I think without the money, we wouldn't be able to, figure out the fun stuff to do at home. We'd have to go to our neighbors and have more outreach. And also because of the particularity of the oil industry being nationalized, meaning that the business itself is not in international competition as such. Like if you mentioned Finland, you'd have Nokia and the Finnish design and all these things. It would be in constant dialogue with other parts of the world, but that's not necessary with oil. So I think this also fuels that regionalism. I've been going forever now, haven't I? I'm sorry. Oh.
Maybe not a question, but a little bit a remark. Now, at the end of your conversation, you said something very nice, that this is haunting the Norwegian art scene. This is the money, or the system of providing commissions through foundations, through the contracts that you said, through regulated contracts that the artist has to sign. And this is visible also in, let's say, in Denmark, some parts of Germany, in wealthier countries. Maybe not necessarily in Qatar, because I think the QMA doesn't really support the local scene in that sense, commissioning artworks.
The population is very small in Qatar, remember?
Also.
It's tiny, it's smaller than Norway.
But now you're speaking in a geography, not only Turkey, but let's say, we have upstairs a Lebanese artist exhibition, where the artists are not, the country doesn't have these kind of foundations, which is giving money, or companies which is on a mass scale buying from the artists. And in the Norwegian model, that the artist has to please the commissioner in a way, as you show, those images are like very pleasing, or I think it's very pleasing. So the voice of the alternative is like quite taken down. So it's protectionism, and it's conservatism, it's conformism. And in this geography, you see some other examples, because we don't have to please so much of the funders, because there are no funders, or there are no buyers, let's say. But pretty much a big quite a big portion of the artist scene is also hoping that there would be support for the arts.
Yeah.
But as a voice from the north, I would just say, that's your advice, because I've seen the danger in the Danish model, because I work there, that there are artists who are actually almost like getting a salary from the country by being commissioned a traffic light junction, to design a sculpture for a junction with a budget that would enable them to live with their whole family of four for 4 years.
Yeah.
So this is something that we would be wishing to do here, but there are obstacles and dangers, as you said in your last word. So I just wanted you to.
I respect that completely, and I think that a mixed model would probably be, let's say, if there is something as a perfect thing, it would be a mixed thing. And you have to also remember that maybe the artists without this governmental support, I mean, the production still happens. We still have a beautiful exhibition upstairs, you know. But the dialogue about the funding is a one-to-one. It's more an individual discussion, and it might be that it isn't limited by the strict regulations of, you know, a contract or like a protocol or whatever, like these things are. But there's, and I would, from my perspective, I know that this is flipping it a little bit, but sometimes that seems like a very, very tempting model, where you actually go and you talk to the person who's going to fund the project and you discuss it and you find ways together, instead of this very kind of arm length distance thing, which we of course know, because it's supposed to be the safe haven of democracy somehow, right? That, you know, if there is arm's length distance between the people that give the money and the people that get the money, then there is some kind of justice done somehow. It's a very strange thing. But I mean, for sure, I mean, God, we're super spoiled. I mean, Denmark, and I mean, it's disturbing to be on my side as well, you know, because it's our relation to the world are very different, and we can only try to kind of reach out and discuss things and try to understand the different perspective. But it's for sure not easy to be on the let's say the Norwegian side always either. And I'm not talking about being difficult financially, but there is a ethical, moral question in this, of course. But I think that the mixed situation is probably the most fruitful. And actually, when you say that people get salaries, I would prefer them to keep. What I would keep from the Norwegian model is not necessarily, you know, feeding a family of four off roundabout in traffic, but I would rather keep the work grants, which is very valuable, where the peer review committee, which it really is, gives them allocates the work grants to artists, and they're artists giving these grants, so it's very close. It's the same problem basically that with the platforms, but it's a peer review. You're handed the privilege of working by your colleagues, and it's a very humbling procedure, I know, because there are like 16 people in the room and they work like crazy for 4 weeks and they're exhausted at the end of it, and we see them every January and they're like, oh my god, I just was on the committee for the work grant, you know, but they take it so seriously, and it's really the most generous grant you could get. But all this other stuff, it twerks the mind a bit, I would say. So anyway, don't show this in Norway.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think there is more if. Are you patient? Yes. Patient? Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I think I'm wondering whether these works are more like, let's say, contemporary art-related artworks. How would you articulate it? Because I think what I see also here is one of the oldest conflicts between the contemporary art and what is the fine art. Like basically, yeah. And then the second question is like, how much did the artists get, and were they happy? Did you find any kind of effort? I think it more relates to what Håkan kind of was referring to.
They were very happy. I can't remember the numbers. It was fairly paid for the time it was. That's all I can say. I can see that there is a relatively right somehow to what people will get today. And for sure, I mean, this is right before, I would say, this contemporary fine art conflict, if we should call it that, appeared. So that wouldn't have been, that's not necessarily present in these projects, like this kind of tug. But I think today that tug exists between, let's say, a professional art field and a non-professional art field. And this is purely for the professional field. So if you have a roundabout, the fictive roundabout that we just got introduced to, would have so-called contemporary art. I would, yes, to make it easy, I would say that they've made the transition also within these projects. Yes, to make it simple, I would say that. Of course, there are, you know, there are details here and there, but to a large extent, yeah. So yeah, that's why I said, to make it simple, we say yes. Anyway, thank you so much for